Welcome back to our Python class, and today we will talk about graphical user interfaces. And let's first go into a little bit of history. What you see on the screen is the first graphical user interface which we know already. Maybe it's from Ivan Sutherland from 1962 actually. Again, you might want to spend a couple maybe 20-30 minutes reading about the history. Pretty amazing stuff actually, right? Something we are familiar already, some of the ideas already familiar. Also, then you have a mother of all demos or demonstrations in late 60s. Douglas Engelbart made a video conferencing and first mouse, some pretty amazing stuff from 1960s actually, right? So some very influential things. And then we get to 1970s, we had Xerox Star machine basically, which introduced most of the common ideas in user interfaces. And again, if you check picture, right, it doesn't look so much out of place. It's 50 years old, almost 50 years old, but very commonly, well, two people who visited Xerox PARC, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they both sort of say they took heavy inspiration from these ideas. And of course Macintosh, and well, actually Lisa first, but then Macintosh in mid 1980s, 84 actually to be exact, for Macintosh came in and became popular again. So Star actually, Xerox made a commercial machine, but it's very expensive, of course, like $20,000 for 1981 is a lot of money. But yeah, so we get to Macintosh, of course, and that's something we are already familiar. So the ideas became, entered the popular conscience or consciousness. So everybody is familiar already with these ideas. So mouse, as a controller. And again, so today, of course, again, you can read about this. Again, we had lots of experiments, but of course these days you have Windows, Microsoft Windows, of course you have Macintosh operating system, and of course you have Linux with different, you can read about all different attempts, right? 95, and again we are here. And of course the big change has been that we have mobile device interfaces, also have new ways of providing human input, touch screens. So that's also something to consider. Again, we spent some time reading about history. It's pretty interesting. And also, again, using only publicly available sources. So what does the graphical user interface consist of? Of course, you have some output. We'll talk about, let's imagine a screen. Again, it could be a 3D screen, but let's say a two-dimensional screen, just a monitor, right? You have some inputs. And if you remember my first lecture when I talked about the hardware, right? And of course, the most common are, of course, keyboard, mouse, of course, but some other ones such as joystick or maybe microphone also are inputs, right? And then you have so-called input-output loop, right? A human or user provides some input, and of course, the computer has to have some sort of event handling these events, and provide some sort of output, of course. And an interesting issue is, of course, latency, which how long does it take to respond, right? This actually is multiple factors, right? So actually the hardware related factors and also software related factors. Maybe you write too slow a software, then computer takes too long to respond, and also it's a question of your monitors also have their own built-in latency. Or when I say latency, I mean delay, basically, right? How long does it take to respond? And we humans respond, we notice delays actually as low as 20-30 milliseconds. That's 30th of thousandth of second. If it gets longer, we start noticing actually, right? So you all have had experience of high latency, graphical user interfaces. Let's say you're connecting somewhere over remote connection to some cloud server, right? And you have response very slowly, right? It's not much fun. Okay, but those are just big ideas in graphical user interfaces. You might want to read about these. We'll talk about the actual practical issues of making a interface in Python. And again, I should mention that in real life, in a commercial setting, you don't need as many graphical interfaces these days as maybe, I don't know, 15-20 years ago. It's not often that you write a standalone application. Usually you write your scripts mostly for in a command line, because you can change them. Again, graphical interfaces are for user facing, end user facing, of course, usually. Somebody who does not know about command line, for example, right? Who wants to use a mouse, right? So that's, again, it's mostly for providing a way of interacting with your application, using the commonly used methods such as mouse and keyboard, right? And they don't want to look at the ugly screens, they want to look at some pretty pictures, basically. Right, so let's look at the good news for you. I'll make a new file. I'll use, so I'll call it day 27 TK intro, Tkinter intro, right, pi. So what is Tkinter, right? So that is, Tkinter can spell, right? Yeah, it's a standard. So that's the good news. It's documentation, right? On the documentation, right? On documentation, of course, all the documentation, right? So if you go here, if you click the link, right? It comes built in. So it's a good news and bad news. Well, it's very relatively plain, meaning you can't really make really something too fancy. Examples, some examples of Tkinter applications, right? Some popular ones. Google Chrome. Well, no, I wouldn't say so. No, I would say Tony is one. Tony, yeah, ID is actually very interesting, right? PyCharm, no. Right. So this is actually beginners Python's ID. One of those cases where for learners, again, you are already more advanced in this. That's why I didn't show you this application. But for those who are really new to Python, you can make some pretty nice stuff using Tony, right? It's made by a teacher in Tartu University, and it's all written in using. It's actually eating your own dog food, basically, right? It's written in Tkinter, and again, and of course, written in Python, obviously, right? So you use Python to write Python programs. So it's one of those cases. There are not too many commercial applications using Tkinter. If you want something more serious, for more commercial applications, use well, you can check maybe something, but usually. For small applications, for bigger, more professional ones, such as yeah, Qt based PyQ frameworks, right, and so on. So yeah, so Qt is the big graphical framework, which is language independent, actually made originally from Nokia. A very big. That's a big alternative. So that's a big picture. Tkinter is great if you need something you have an end user. Maybe you don't want to sell the application, but you have internal use. So internal tools for companies, etc. Right? So where you don't need to commercialize. But I'm sure there are some Tkinter commercial applications, but again, probably not too many, because again, it's meant for simpler applications. But okay. But you can still make some nice stuff, and again, you'll see that it's not really hard to do, right? So, right, so it's a standard library. We already mentioned that. So import, right? We'll do, yeah. So no, I don't like this approach. Actually, we will use this import Tkinter. Remember, we don't want to import wildcards. Some tutorials say as TK. Some tutorials use star, but that is not recommended, right? Again, because it can cause name conflicts. Remember why we don't use star, right? Wildcard, because you don't even know. Well, Tkinter is a standard module, right? But you still don't know what you're importing, right? So we're going to be attaching TK to our commands, of course, the graphical commands. But that's a small price to pay for avoiding any naming conflicts. Okay, so let's start with making a simple window, right? So window, and we will do something like this. Window equals, yeah, create a window, right? And let's run this small, tiny program. Let's see, do we have time? We have time, and let's run it. And we should have a screen somewhere. We have it actually, and maybe I should say it actually input. I'll do input something, right? Yeah. Right, so yeah, we need of course wait for input. Yeah, okay, so you see the input, and I press any key here, right, and our input is gone. All right.